the Egyptian dragon god. The kingdom of Egypt lay beneath a veil of despair. Once, the mighty Nile had flowed like a silver ribbon, its waters nourishing the land and feeding the hearts of its people. Now, the river was but a shadow of itself, a trickling stream where abundance had once ruled. The crops wilted under the blazing sun, their stalks brittle and brown. The cattle wandered aimlessly, searching for water where there was none. Villagers whispered of an ancient curse, their eyes filled with dread, and the once thriving cities began to tremble at the looming threat of famine. In the heart of the capital, Pharaoh Akhenaten sat upon his throne, his brow furrowed in thought. His youth had once been a source of pride among his people, a symbol of strength and vitality, but now it seemed to weigh upon him as a burden. The weight of the crown grew heavier with each passing day, as the Nile, the lifeblood of his kingdom, continued to dry up. Akhenaten had sent emissaries to the temples, offerings to the gods, and prayers to the heavens, but all had been met with silence. The priests had gathered in the great hall, their somber faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. At their head stood Imhotep, the High Priest, his robes shimmering with gold and his eyes filled with an ancient wisdom that none dared question. He stepped forward, his staff tapping against the marble floor, and the room fell into a hush. "Great Pharaoh," Imhotep began, his voice heavy with the weight of millennia. "The Nile, the sacred river that has given life to Egypt for centuries, is not merely suffering from drought. It is bound by a curse, one that has slumbered for aeons and is now awoken. The prophecies speak of this time, when the river's flow would cease and the shadows of the past would rise again to claim what was lost." Akhenaten's eyes narrowed, the words striking him like a blow. "A curse?" he echoed, his voice low and dangerous. "What curse dares to threaten my kingdom?" Imhotep nodded, unrolling a scroll of ancient papyrus that crackled in the still air. The hieroglyphs shimmered under the flickering torchlight, their meaning as ominous as the weight of the desert wind. "It is written that, deep beneath the sands, within the heart of the Nile, rests Apep, the Egyptian dragon god. Once a guardian of the river's treasures, Apep was cast into eternal slumber for his greed and envy. But now, the dragon god stirs, awakened by the sins of man and the neglect of the gods. He has risen, and with him, the river's treasures, its life force, are locked away." The pharaoh's hands clenched into fists upon his throne. The very air seemed to grow colder, as though the mention of Apep's name had drawn the chill of the underworld into the palace. "And what is it that I must do?" Akhenaten asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "The prophecy is clear, my pharaoh," Imhotep said, bowing his head. "Only a ruler with the courage of Ra and the wisdom of Thoth can confront the dragon god and reclaim the treasures of the Nile. You must journey to the forbidden temple, hidden deep within the desert, where Apep waits. There, you must face him alone, for no mortal may assist in this sacred battle. The fate of Egypt rests upon your shoulders." A silence fell over the hall, the enormity of the task pressing down like the weight of 1,000 stones. Akhenaten rose from his throne, his dark eyes burning with determination. "Then I shall go," he declared. "I will not let my kingdom fall to ruin, nor will I allow a forgotten god to claim what belongs to Egypt." Imhotep's eyes met the pharaoh's, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. "The gods are with you, my pharaoh," he said solemnly. "But beware, Apep is no ordinary foe. He commands the power of the Nile itself, and his wrath is boundless." Akhenaten nodded, his mind already set. The journey would be perilous, and the task might cost him his life. But the alternative was far worse: the end of his kingdom and the death of his people. As the high priest chanted ancient blessings, Akhenaten steeled himself for the path ahead. Egypt had thrived for centuries, and he would not allow it to perish under his reign. With the weight of the prophecy echoing in his mind, Pharaoh Akhenaten knew that the only way to save his people was to face the dragon god that guarded the Nile's treasures and defeat him before it was too late. The once mighty Nile, Egypt's lifeblood, now lay silent, its waters retreating further each day, exposing the cracked earth like the bones of a forgotten god. Pharaoh Akhenaten stood at its banks, watching as the sacred river seemed to wither before his eyes. The wind carried the scent of decay, and the hum of the land was replaced by an ominous quiet. What had once been a place of life and abundance now felt haunted by invisible forces, as if the very spirit of the Nile had been stolen away. Behind him, Imhotep, the high priest, approached, his staff sinking slightly into the soft, drying mud. His expression was unreadable, but the weight of knowledge lingered in his every step. He raised his hand, and with a quiet murmur, he gestured toward the horizon, where dark clouds gathered on the edge of the desert. "It has begun," Imhotep said, his voice low and filled with the gravity of ancient things. "The curse tightens its grip. The Nile, once so full of life, has been severed from its source. Without the treasures it holds, the river will continue to fade, and with it, the heart of Egypt." Akhenaten turned, his dark eyes flashing with determination. "This curse, it is more than the withering of water. Something stirs in the land. The people speak of creatures, of strange apparitions along the riverbanks. They claim the sands move as if alive." Imhotep nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains where the forbidden temple lay hidden. "They are not mistaken. The Nile's treasures are bound to its life force, but Apep, in his greed, has taken them for himself. The balance of the gods has been disturbed, and when the gods are disturbed, the land suffers." The pharaoh's jaw tightened. He had seen the signs himself, crops reduced to dust before they could even ripen, herds of cattle collapsing under the heat as if drained of life. Villages, once bustling with trade and song, now echoed with the cries of despair. The priests performed rituals, offerings were made, but nothing quelled the hunger of the cursed dragon god. Pharaoh Akhenaten knew the path ahead would be treacherous. Yet, he had not risen to the throne only to be remembered as the king who let Egypt fall. The gods had chosen him, had placed the crown upon his head, and it was his duty to confront the darkness that threatened his kingdom. "We must act swiftly," Akhenaten said, his tone sharp as the edge of his royal scepter. "Summon my most trusted warriors. We journey at dawn to the Forbidden Temple." Imhotep hesitated, his brow furrowing. "There is more you must know, my pharaoh. Apep's influence has grown beyond what the old texts warned. The curse he spreads is not only of the river. He commands servants of the Nile creatures, born of water and sand, things that defy the natural order. As you journey closer to his lair, the dangers will only increase." The pharaoh met Imhotep's gaze, unflinching. "We have no choice. The longer we delay, the more our people suffer." From behind them, a figure stepped forward, a woman dressed in flowing robes of deep crimson, her eyes gleaming with a sharp intelligence that seemed to pierce through the shadows of fate itself. She was Nefertari, the royal priestess, skilled in ancient magic and rumored to possess knowledge of the gods that even Imhotep dared not speak of. She had come at Akhenaten's summons, and now she stood before him with a calm intensity that belied the danger of what was to come. "If you are to face Apep," Nefertari said, her voice smooth as the Nile's lost currents, "you will need more than strength and warriors. The dragon god was once a protector of the river, but his heart has been twisted by greed and pride. You must find a way to weaken his influence before you confront him, or he will swallow you whole, as he did the river's treasures." "And how do you propose we do that?" Akhenaten asked, though he already suspected the answer. Nefertari's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though it held no warmth. "There are ancient rites known to those who serve both the gods and the shadows. I know the incantations that can break the barriers around Apep's lair, but they come at a cost." Akhenaten inclined his head. "And what cost is that?" The priestess's smile faded. "The cost of secrets long buried. You must be prepared, Pharaoh, for the truths you uncover may change the course of your reign forever." A chill passed through the air, though the desert sun still blazed overhead. Akhenaten felt the weight of her words settle into his bones. The path ahead was not only one of physical peril, but of unseen forces that could tear apart the very fabric of Egypt's fate. He would need courage, wisdom, and the strength of his ancestors to face what lay within the heart of the Nile's curse. As the sun began to dip behind the distant dunes, casting long shadows over the drying riverbed, Akhenaten knew his kingdom's time was running out. The dragon god awaited him, coiled in the depths of the Forbidden Temple, guarding the treasures that would either save or doom all of Egypt. Tomorrow, the journey would begin. At dawn, the sun rose slowly over the endless expanse of the desert, casting long shadows on the golden sands. Pharaoh Akhenaten stood at the edge of the royal palace, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The desert was vast, unforgiving, and treacherous, but it was the only path to the forbidden temple. He felt the weight of the task before him, heavier than the crown he wore. His kingdom was counting on him, and failure would mean the death of Egypt. By his side stood General Horemheb, a man of towering stature, his armor gleaming in the early light. The pharaoh's most trusted warrior, Horemheb, had fought in countless battles. In his presence was a comfort to Akhenaten. Beside him, draped in her crimson robes, was Nefertari, the royal priestess. Her face was calm, her eyes sharp with the knowledge she carried. She had spoken little since the night before, but her silence seemed to hold an ancient power. The small company of warriors gathered around them, silent, disciplined, and ready for whatever awaited in the heart of the desert. These were the finest soldiers Egypt had to offer, each sworn to protect their pharaoh with their lives. But even their courage seemed fragile against the daunting task ahead, for none had ever ventured to the forbidden temple and returned. The journey began with a solemn march through the gates of Thebes, the citizens watching from the streets, their faces etched with fear and hope. They whispered prayers to the gods as their pharaoh and his warriors passed, the sound carried away by the wind. Akhenaten did not look back. His mind was already set on the distant sands, where the fate of his kingdom would be decided. As they ventured deeper into the desert, the landscape grew harsher. The sun blazed overhead, turning the sands beneath their feet into a burning sea. The air was thick with the heat, making each breath a laborious task. But Akhenaten pressed forward, his resolve unshaken. Beside him, Nefertari walked with ease, her robes fluttering like the wings of a falcon, untouched by the heat. By midday, the winds began to shift. The calm desert air gave way to a gathering storm, and the sands rose like swirling phantoms, threatening to blind and disorient them. Akhenaten's men shielded their faces, their movements slowing as they struggled to press on. "It is Apep's doing," Nefertari said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "He knows we are coming. He stirs the sands to confuse us, to turn us away." Akhenaten narrowed his eyes, peering into the storm. The sandstorm grew fiercer, and the path ahead became obscured. But he knew they could not turn back now. "We will not be swayed," he said, his voice firm. With a nod to General Horemheb, Akhenaten urged his men to stay close, each step forward a test of their endurance. The storm raged on, and the sands seemed to rise like waves, threatening to swallow them whole. But Nefertari raised her hands, chanting softly in the old tongue, her words lost to the wind but her intent clear. The storm seemed to part, if only for a moment, allowing them to glimpse the distant shape of their destination. "There," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The temple lies ahead." The forbidden temple stood on the horizon, its silhouette dark and foreboding. It was an ancient structure, its towering columns half buried in the shifting sands. Time had eroded much of its grandeur, but its presence was still commanding, like a sentinel of forgotten gods. A chill ran down Akhenaten's spine as they drew nearer. There was something unnatural about the place, as if the land itself had rejected its presence, and the air grew heavier with each step they took toward it. As they approached the entrance, the sandstorm finally began to wane, leaving behind an eerie silence. The temple loomed before them, its walls covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to pulse with ancient power. The very ground beneath their feet felt alive with the energy of the gods, and Akhenaten could sense the presence of Apep, the dragon god, lurking somewhere within. "This is where it begins," Nefertari said, her eyes locked on the temple's towering gates. "The guardians of the river will test us. Be prepared, for they are bound by magic older than Egypt itself." General Horemheb stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "We are ready, my pharaoh. Whatever lies ahead, we will face it together." Akhenaten nodded, though his heart pounded in his chest. He knew that the journey into the temple would be more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The Nile's curse was not merely a loss of water. It was a corruption of the very life force of the land. To defeat Apep and reclaim the treasures of the Nile, they would need more than strength. They would need the favor of the gods themselves. With a deep breath, Akhenaten led his warriors toward the dark entrance of the Forbidden Temple. Inside, the answers and the dangers awaited. The air inside the Forbidden Temple was thick with the scent of ancient stone and undisturbed dust. Shadows clung to the high ceilings, where beams of faint sunlight struggled to penetrate. Pharaoh Akhenaten, flanked by General Horemheb and Nefertari, stepped cautiously into the vast, echoing chamber. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft scuff of their boots on the worn stone floor. Every corner of the temple seemed to hum with the power of long-forgotten gods. "We are in Apep's domain now," Nefertari whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the darkness. "Tread carefully. He will sense us, Nefertari." The walls were covered with carvings of serpents coiling through rivers and deserts, their eyes glittering with malice. Akhenaten could feel the weight of those eyes upon him, as though the temple itself was alive and watching. His heart pounded with each step, but he kept his chin high, determined to meet whatever awaited them. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, as if the very earth was groaning in pain. The floor beneath them trembled, and from the shadows ahead, a hiss like boiling water filled the air. Akhenaten's grip tightened around the sacred scepter he carried, its golden surface glowing faintly in response to the unseen threat. Nefertari's eyes flicked toward the far end of the chamber. "He comes," she whispered. Without warning, the ground before them split apart, and from the gaping chasm, a massive serpent rose, a creature as black as the void, with scales that shimmered like liquid obsidian. Its eyes burned with the heat of the desert sun, and its fangs gleamed like curved blades. This was no ordinary beast. This was one of Apep's servants, a monstrous serpent sent to destroy all who dared enter the temple. The serpent's hiss turned into a deafening roar, as it lunged toward them, its body coiling and uncoiling with lightning speed. Akhenaten barely had time to raise his scepter before the creature struck, its fangs aiming for his throat. But Horemheb was quicker. The general drew his sword and stepped between the pharaoh and the serpent, slashing at the beast with a force that echoed through the chamber. The serpent recoiled, its body writhing as it let out a scream that rattled the walls. But it was not defeated. With terrifying speed, it coiled around Horemheb, its immense strength squeezing the air from his lungs. The general struggled, but the serpent's grip was like iron. Akhenaten's heart raced. He could not lose Horemheb, not here, not now. But how could they defeat such a creature? The scepter pulsed in his hand, and instinctively, he raised it high above his head. With a sharp word of command in the ancient tongue, the scepter flared with golden light, illuminating the chamber and casting long shadows across the serpent's coiled body. The light seared the beast's dark scales, and it let out a furious cry, releasing its grip on Horemheb. The general collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, while Akhenaten stepped forward, holding the glowing scepter before him like a shield. Nefertari, her eyes flashing with the power of her magic, began chanting under her breath. The air around her shimmered with energy, and as her voice rose, the serpent faltered, its movements growing sluggish. It thrashed wildly, but its strength was waning. Akhenaten seized the moment, summoning all his courage. He drove the scepter into the ground, sending a pulse of divine energy through the temple. The serpent let out one final, earth-shaking roar before its massive body crumbled to dust, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Akhenaten's chest heaved with exertion as he looked down at the remains of the beast. His scepter, once glowing brightly, dimmed and returned to its normal state. Around him, the air felt lighter, though the darkness of the temple still loomed. Horemheb staggered to his feet, his breath ragged but steady. "My Pharaoh," he said between gasps. "The serpent, it was merely a servant. Apep will not be so easily defeated." Nefertari nodded solemnly, her face pale from the effort of her magic. "He knows we are here now. This was only a taste of his wrath." Akhenaten wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced at the towering doorway ahead, the path that would lead them deeper into the temple toward Apep himself. He could feel the weight of the dragon, God's presence pressing down upon him like a physical force, and he knew that what lay ahead would be far worse than the serpent they had just faced. But there was no turning back. The fate of Egypt hung in the balance, and Akhenaten was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The Nile's curse will not lift until Apep is destroyed, Akhenaten said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "We move forward. Let him send his worst. We will not falter." With a nod from Horemheb and a knowing glance from Nefertari, Akhenaten led his companions deeper into the heart of the forbidden temple, where the true wrath of the dragon god awaited them. The final confrontation was drawing near, and they would need every ounce of strength and wisdom to survive what was to come. The deeper they ventured into the forbidden temple, the more the walls seemed to close in around them, pressing with the weight of unseen forces. The air grew colder, carrying the faint scent of stagnant water and ancient stone. Pharaoh Akhenaten moved with purpose, though the weight of the battle with the serpent lingered in his bones. Each step forward was a reminder of what lay ahead. The dragon god Apep, coiled within the heart of the temple, guarding the treasures that held the key to Egypt's survival. General Horemheb's injuries slowed their pace, but the man's resolve never faltered. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his jaw clenched with determination. By his side, Nefertari walked with her head held high, her eyes alert, as if sensing the power of the gods that pulsed through the temple's walls. Suddenly, the corridor widened, opening into a vast chamber bathed in an eerie green light. At its center, a shimmering pool of water lay still as glass, reflecting the stone ceiling above. Around the pool stood 4 towering statues of crocodiles, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. These were not mere statues, however. They were the guardians of the sacred river, creatures of ancient magic bound to protect the secrets of the Nile. The water rippled, though no wind disturbed the air. Akhenaten felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, as if the very stone was watching him. He stepped closer to the pool, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. "The guardians," Nefertari whispered, her voice low and filled with reverence. "They have watched over this place for millennia, protecting the treasures of the Nile from those unworthy to claim them." As if responding to her words, the pool began to churn. From its depths, 4 figures rose, half human, half crocodile, with glistening scales and eyes that gleamed with a predatory hunger. Each guardian carried a spear of blackened metal, their movements slow but deliberate as they emerged from the water, dripping with the essence of the Nile. Akhenaten stepped back, raising his scepter in defense. "We seek passage," he called, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We do not come to steal, but to restore balance to the Nile. Stand aside and let us continue." The largest of the guardians, its massive jaws lined with razor-sharp teeth, tilted its head, studying the pharaoh with an intelligence that sent a chill through the air. When it spoke, its voice was a low growl that seemed to rise from the depths of the river itself. "Only those who are worthy may pass. The treasures of the Nile belong to the river and its master. To prove your worth, you must face the trial." Akhenaten's heart raced, though he kept his face calm. "What trial?" The guardian's eyes gleamed. "A trial of strength, wisdom, and honor, one for each of you." It pointed a clawed finger toward Akhenaten, Horemheb, and Nefertari. "Only if you succeed will the way to Apep be opened." Nefertari's eyes darkened. "These creatures are bound by ancient magic. They will not let us pass unless we prove ourselves. We must face them." Before Akhenaten could respond, the guardians lunged forward, their spears gleaming in the pale light. The first guardian, towering and fierce, charged at Horemheb with a roar that echoed through the chamber. The general met it head-on, his sword flashing as he parried the creature's blow. Their clash was violent, a brutal display of strength and will as the 2 warriors fought, their weapons clanging and sparking in the dim light. The second guardian moved toward Nefertari, its spear aimed at her heart, but but the priestess was quick, raising her arms and chanting in the ancient language. The air around her shimmered, and a barrier of light appeared between her and the guardian. The creature struck the barrier, but Nefertari's magic held firm, repelling the blow with a burst of energy. She countered with a wave of her hand, sending a stream of light toward the guardian, forcing it back. Akhenaten faced the third guardian, his grip tightening on the scepter. The creature circled him, its eyes gleaming with malice. It struck with lightning speed, but Akhenaten was quicker, blocking the attack with his scepter. He could feel the power of the gods flowing through him as he deflected blow after blow, the weight of Egypt's fate pressing upon his shoulders. With a shout, he struck the guardian across the chest, sending it stumbling backward. But the fourth guardian, the leader, was watching, waiting. It moved with a predator's patience, and as Akhenaten turned to face it, he felt a shift in the air. This was no mere test of combat. This was a test of the pharaoh's heart. The guardian spoke again, its voice deep and resonant. "You fight well, Pharaoh, but strength alone will not save your kingdom. Only when you understand the Nile's true power can you claim victory." Akhenaten hesitated, the meaning of the guardian's words weighing heavily on him. The Nile's true power? It was not just the river's life-giving waters, but something more, something deeper. He realized then that the treasures of the Nile were not meant to be taken, but restored. Lowering his scepter, Akhenaten met the guardian's gaze. "The Nile is not mine to command," he said, his voice steady. "It belongs to Egypt, to the people. I seek not to possess it, but to save it." The guardian's eyes gleamed with approval, and with a slow nod it stepped aside, allowing passage. The other guardians followed suit, retreating into the shadows, leaving the path ahead clear. Akhenaten exhaled slowly, the weight of the trial lifting from his shoulders. They had passed the test, but the true challenge still awaited. Apep, the dragon god, lay deeper within the temple, and their final confrontation drew ever closer. The passage beyond the guardians led them deeper into the heart of the forbidden temple. The air was thick with the scent of age-old magic, a blend of musty stone and forgotten power that seemed to pulse through the very walls. Pharaoh Akhenaten walked with a new weight on his shoulders, the gravity of the trial behind him still lingering in his thoughts. The Nile's treasures were not mere riches, but a living force that sustained his people. Apep's greed had twisted that power, and it was now Akhenaten's duty to restore it. Nefertari, ever watchful, walked beside him, her expression unreadable, but her steps sure. Horemheb, though still nursing wounds from the battle with the guardians, remained steadfast at the pharaoh's other side. They were a formidable trio, but as the corridor narrowed and the air grew colder, they could all sense that the most dangerous trials lay ahead. The passage opened into another chamber, this one smaller and more intimate than the others. Its walls were lined with intricate carvings, depicting scenes of ancient pharaohs standing before gods, seeking their favor. At the center of the room stood an obsidian pedestal, upon which rested a single golden ankh, the symbol of eternal life. The chamber was lit by flickering braziers, their flames casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance with hidden intent. As they entered, the ankh shimmered and a voice echoed through the chamber, not a physical voice, but one that seemed to speak directly into Akhenaten's mind. It was the voice of the gods, low and resonant, filled with the weight of eternity. "Pharaoh," the voice whispered, its tone both inviting and ominous, You stand before the trial of wisdom. To proceed, you must answer the riddle of the Nile. Fail, and the treasures you seek will be lost forever. Akhenaten stiffened, his pulse quickening. He glanced at Nefertari, whose sharp eyes narrowed as she studied the carvings on the walls. "The trial of wisdom," she murmured. "The gods do not test strength here. They test your mind, your understanding of the balance that governs the Nile." The voice of the gods continued, unfurling its riddle like a serpent weaving through reeds. "I am the source of life, yet I take it. I am the bringer of fortune, yet I leave ruin in my wake. I am as old as the earth, yet I flow anew each day. Tell me, Pharaoh, what am I?" The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Akhenaten's brow furrowed as he considered the riddle. His mind raced through the possible answers, each one falling short of the full truth. The god spoke of something that was both life-giving and destructive, both ancient and ever-renewing. He knew the answer was tied to the Nile, but it was not as simple as the river itself. Beside him, Nefertari's eyes scanned the hieroglyphs, her fingers tracing the figures of gods and kings. "The Nile," she said quietly, "is not just a river. It is the balance between creation and destruction, between abundance and drought. It is the pulse of Egypt." Akhenaten nodded slowly, her words giving form to the thoughts swirling in his mind. The Nile's floods brought life to the land, nurturing crops and sustaining the people. But when the floods failed, it brought death and ruin. It was both a source of life and a harbinger of destruction. It had existed since the dawn of time, yet it was reborn with each new flood. The pharaoh stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the golden ankh. His voice was steady as he spoke the answer that now seemed so clear. "You are the Nile," Akhenaten said, his words echoing through the chamber. "You bring life with your floods, but you take it away when you recede. You are the ancient river, yet you flow anew with each season. You are the balance that holds Egypt in your hands." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the braziers flared, their flames dancing higher as the voice of the gods returned, now filled with approval. "You have spoken true, Pharaoh. The Nile is both life and death, creation and destruction. You understand the balance that governs this land. Proceed, for the wisdom of the Nile is with you." The golden ankh shimmered once more, and with a faint hum, the obsidian pedestal sank into the ground, revealing a hidden passage beneath. The way forward had been unlocked. Nefertari exhaled softly, a rare smile curving her lips. "You have passed the trial of wisdom, my pharaoh. The gods are watching over you." Akhenaten nodded, though the relief he felt was tempered by the knowledge that Apep still awaited them. "The gods have shown us favor," he said, "but our greatest challenge is yet to come. Apep will not be so easily defeated." Horemheb stepped forward, his sword resting at his side. "We are with you, Pharaoh, no matter what lies ahead." Together, the trio descended into the passage below, the air growing colder with each step. They had passed the trials of strength and wisdom, but they knew that Apep, the dragon god, would not be swayed by such things. The final confrontation was drawing near, and the fate of Egypt hung in the balance. The Nile had tested them, but the true test awaited in the shadows of Apep's lair. The descent into the hidden passage was slow and cautious. The air grew colder, denser, as though the walls themselves were suffocating the life out of the very air they breathed. The faint light of the braziers from the chamber above faded into darkness, leaving only the glow of Nefertari's enchanted staff to guide their way. Pharaoh Akhenaten, Horemheb, and Nefertari moved in silence, their steps muffled by the thick layer of dust that had settled over centuries of abandonment. The corridor ahead was narrow and winding, and Akhenaten could feel a presence in the air, a deep, pulsing energy that seemed to hum through the stone walls. It was the power of the Nile, but twisted and corrupted, warped by Apep's greed. He could feel the weight of the dragon god's presence growing stronger as they ventured deeper into the heart of the temple. Each step felt heavier, as though they were walking not just toward their fate, but into the belly of an ancient legend. Suddenly, the corridor opened into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling was so high that it vanished into darkness, and the floor stretched out in front of them, lined with carvings of serpents and hieroglyphs that shimmered faintly in the light of Nefertari's staff. At the center of the chamber stood a colossal stone pillar, its surface covered in intricate carvings of the Nile's floods, the rise and fall of dynasties, and the eternal struggle between life and death. Surrounding the pillar were scattered remnants of ancient artifacts, forgotten treasures that had once belonged to kings and gods alike. Nefertari's eyes narrowed as she studied the chamber, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the Hall of Forgotten Legends," she said, her words filled with awe and reverence. "These carvings tell the story of the Nile, its creation, its power, and the legends that have been lost to time." Akhenaten moved closer to the pillar, his fingers tracing the ancient hieroglyphs. He could feel the energy coursing through the stone, the pulse of the river itself woven into the very fabric of the temple. It was a reminder of the Nile's ancient power, a force that predated even the oldest of pharaohs, and at the heart of it all, there was one figure that stood out among the carvings, a dragon coiled around the river, its eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. "Apep," Akhenaten murmured, his voice laced with tension. He was once the protector of the Nile's treasures, but something changed. His greed consumed him, and now he seeks to take what belongs to the people. Nefertari nodded, her expression grave. "The legends speak of Apep as a guardian, but his nature was always dual, both protector and destroyer. When the gods entrusted him with the treasures of the Nile, they also placed a burden upon him. Over the centuries, his jealousy grew, and he sought to claim the treasures for himself." As she spoke, her hand moved over the carvings, tracing the images of Apep's transformation from a revered guardian to a tyrant, his serpentine form growing more monstrous with each passing age. The legends told of his eventual rebellion against the gods, of how he hoarded the Nile's treasures deep within the temple, severing the river's life force from the land. "And now," Nefertari continued, her eyes meeting Akhenaten's, "he has awakened once more. His power over the Nile has grown, and he will not relinquish it willingly." Akhenaten felt a chill run through him as he studied the carvings, his mind racing. The legend was clear. Apep's greed had corrupted the very essence of the Nile, and now his power threatened to destroy Egypt. The treasures of the Nile were more than just gold and jewels. They were the life force of the kingdom, the very source of its prosperity. Without them, the river would dry up and the land would fall into ruin. But there was something else in the carvings, something that caught Akhenaten's eye. Hidden among the depictions of serpents and floods was a small, barely visible symbol, a crescent moon surrounded by stars. It was a symbol of Maat, the goddess of balance and truth. Akhenaten's heart quickened as he realized what it meant. "The Nile's power is not Apep's alone," Akhenaten said. his voice rising with newfound determination. "The river belongs to Maat as much as it belongs to him. She is the goddess of balance, and if we can invoke her power, we may be able to tip the scales." Nefertari's eyes widened in understanding. "Of course," she said, "Ma'at represents the balance of the world, the harmony that Apep has disrupted. If we can restore that balance, we may weaken him." Horemheb, who had been silently listening, stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword. "But how do we invoke the power of a goddess?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. Nefertari raised her staff, the light growing brighter as she spoke. "There is an ancient rite, one known only to the priestesses of Maat. It is a prayer of balance, a call to the goddess to restore what has been broken. But it will require more than magic. It will require the heart of a true ruler, one who understands the weight of the Nile's power." Akhenaten nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then I will be that ruler," he said. "I will invoke Maat's power, and we will restore balance to the Nile." As the three of them stood before the pillar surrounded by the forgotten legends of the Nile, Akhenaten knew that the final confrontation with Apep was drawing near. The dragon god had corrupted the Nile for too long, and the time had come to break his hold over Egypt's most sacred treasure. The air inside the temple grew colder, heavier, as if the very breath of the earth had stilled in anticipation. Pharaoh Akhenaten, Nefertari, and Horemheb stood in the center of the Hall of Forgotten Legends, surrounded by the carvings of 1,000 lifetimes. The power of the Nile pulsed beneath their feet, a silent current running through the stone, while the weight of the task ahead pressed upon them like the weight of the heavens. Without warning, the ground trembled. A deep, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber, shaking dust from the ancient ceiling. The pillar at the center of the room vibrated with the force, and Akhenaten felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The presence he had felt since entering the temple was no longer distant. It was here, and it was awake. Nefertari's voice was barely a whisper. "Apep stirs." The temperature dropped further, and from the shadows, a low hiss reverberated, growing louder until it became a deafening roar. The ground cracked, and from the depths of the earth, Apep emerged. A dragon of unfathomable size, his scales the color of night, his eyes burning with a molten fire that consumed everything they gazed upon. His serpentine body coiled and uncoiled, filling the chamber with his presence. He was a creature of the Nile, a living embodiment of its darkest power, and the sight of him was enough to freeze the heart of even the bravest warrior. Apep's voice echoed through the hall, deep and ancient, filled with the malice of a god who had long since turned against the world. "You dare to enter my domain, Pharaoh?" His eyes fixed on Akhenaten, burning with contempt. "The Nile is mine. Its treasures belong to me, and no mortal shall take them." Akhenaten raised his scepter, his voice steady though his heart pounded. "The Nile belongs to Egypt, not to you, Apep. You were once its guardian, but your greed has poisoned the river and brought ruin to the land. I am here to restore balance." The dragon's laughter filled the chamber, a sound like the rumbling of 1,000 storms. "Balance? There is no balance in power, Pharaoh. There is only the strong and the weak who serve them." With that, Apep lunged forward, his massive body striking with the speed of a lightning bolt. Akhenaten barely had time to react, raising his scepter just in time to deflect the blow. The force of the impact sent him staggering back, but he held his ground, his eyes locked on the dragon god. Horemheb charged forward, his sword flashing as he swung at the creature, aiming for the vulnerable underbelly. But Apep's scales were harder than stone, and the sword clanged off with a shower of sparks. The dragon whipped its tail, knocking Horemheb across the chamber and into the wall with a sickening thud. "Horemheb!" Akhenaten shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the dragon's roar. Nefertari raised her staff, her eyes glowing with the power of her magic. "By the gods, I summon the light of Ra," she cried, and a blinding beam of light shot from her staff, striking Apep in the chest. The dragon shrieked in fury as the light burned against his scales, but the attack only enraged him further. With a roar, Apep lashed out at Nefertari, his jaws snapping toward her with deadly intent. Akhenaten threw himself between them, raising his scepter to block the strike. The scepter flared with divine energy, the power of the gods channeling through him. Apep's jaws clamped down on the scepter, but the magic within it held strong, keeping the dragon's crushing force at bay. For a moment, the two forces were locked in a deadly struggle, the dragon god's immense strength against the pharaoh's divine protection. But Akhenaten knew he could not hold Apep off forever. The power of the Nile was still under Apep's control, and as long as that was the case, the dragon would not be defeated. "The balance!" Nefertari shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "You must invoke Ma'at's power, or Apep will destroy us all." Akhenaten gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he held Apep at bay. "How?" Nefertari's eyes flashed. "The incantation, speak the words of balance, the words carved in the hall." Akhenaten's mind raced. He had seen the symbol of Ma'at, the crescent moon and the stars, hidden among the carvings on the walls. The goddess of balance, the only force that could oppose Apep's greed. Without hesitation, Akhenaten began to chant the ancient words, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The language was old, older than Egypt itself, and as the words left his lips, the air in the chamber began to change. A wind stirred from nowhere, swirling around the room, carrying with it the power of the Nile in its purest form. Apep's eyes widened, his grip on the scepter weakening as the magic of Ma'at filled the air. The dragon let out a roar of defiance, but the force of balance was too strong. Slowly, inexorably, Apep was pushed back, his massive body writhing in pain as the power of the goddess drained his strength. Akhenaten continued the chant, his voice rising in power. The light of Nefertari's staff flared once more, and the chamber was filled with a blinding radiance. Apep's roars turned to screams as the power of Ma'at consumed him, unraveling the corruption that had held the Nile captive for so long. With one final deafening cry, the dragon god crumbled into dust, his form disintegrating in the light of the goddess's power. The chamber fell silent, the air still and heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. Akhenaten lowered his scepter, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The battle was over, but the cost had been great. Horemheb lay still against the wall, and Nefertari's magic flickered weakly as she lowered her staff. But the Nile had been freed. Balance had been restored. The stars above shone through the cracks in the temple's ceiling, illuminating the chamber with a soft, peaceful light. Beneath those stars, Akhenaten stood victorious, knowing that Egypt had been saved, not through the strength of arms, but through the wisdom of balance. The temple was still, its ancient stones no longer resonating with the fury of the dragon god. In the quiet aftermath, Akhenaten stood over the remains of Apep, his chest rising and falling with the deep, ragged breaths of exhaustion. Around him, the hall was bathed in a soft, ethereal light. the light of Maat's blessing. The goddess of balance had answered his call, and in doing so, had broken the curse that had held the Nile captive for so long. Nefertari leaned heavily on her staff, her face pale but her eyes bright with relief. "It is done," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "The dragon god is no more. The Nile will live again." Akhenaten felt a surge of hope well within him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to believe that Egypt might yet be saved. The power of the Nile, long sealed away by Apep's greed, would now be free to flow once more, bringing life back to the land. But as the echoes of the battle faded into silence, Akhenaten knew that their journey was not yet over. "The treasures," he said, his voice hoarse from the chanting. "We came for the treasures of the Nile, the life force that will restore Egypt." Nefertari nodded, her gaze turning to the far side of the chamber where the ancient stone pillar stood. The carvings on its surface seemed to shimmer with newfound energy, as though the defeat of Apep had awakened something deep within the temple itself. Slowly, cautiously, they approached the pillar, their steps echoing in the vast emptiness. The pillar began to glow, a soft golden light emanating from its base and rising up through the carved images of gods, kings, and serpents. The light was warm, filling the chamber with a sense of peace and renewal, and Akhenaten could feel the power of the Nile flowing through it like a living current. This was the heart of the river's strength, the treasures that had been hidden for centuries, guarded by Apep's greed. As they reached the base of the pillar, the stone itself began to shift, the carvings parting like petals of a lotus flower. From within the pillar, a single glowing object emerged, a golden chalice, simple yet exquisite, its surface engraved with the symbols of life and eternity. The chalice pulsed with the energy of the Nile, a tangible manifestation of the river's life force. Nefertari's breath caught in her throat. "The chalice of life," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "It holds the essence of the Nile's power, the very life force of Egypt. With this, we can restore the river and save the kingdom." Akhenaten reached out, his hand hovering over the chalice. He could feel the energy radiating from it, warm and alive, like the heartbeat of the river itself. This was the treasure they had sought, the key to breaking the curse and returning balance to the land. And yet, as his fingers brushed the surface of the chalice, he hesitated. The carvings on the walls, the legends of the Nile, flashed in his mind. Apep's fall had come from his desire to control the treasures, to hoard the power for himself. The chalice was not meant to be possessed. It was meant to be shared, its power flowing freely through the land, not held in the hands of a single ruler. Akhenaten drew back, his eyes narrowing in thought. "The Nile's power belongs to Egypt," he said softly, as though speaking to the river itself. "It does not belong to me, nor to any one man." Nefertari watched him closely, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You are right, my pharaoh. The power of the Nile cannot be contained. It must be given back to the land, to flow as it was meant to." With a nod, Akhenaten lifted the chalice and held it high. The golden light within it grew brighter, illuminating the entire chamber until it felt as though the sun itself had descended into the temple. The air thrummed with energy, and Akhenaten could feel the power of the river surging through him, filling him with the strength of the gods. "The Nile will live again," he declared, his voice strong and clear, "and Egypt will rise with it." He poured the essence of the chalice into the air, letting it flow outward like a river of light. The golden energy spread through the chamber, seeping into the walls, the floor, the very stone of the temple itself. Outside, the ground trembled as the power of the Nile awakened, its waters rushing once more through the veins of Egypt, bringing life where there had been only death and desolation. The change was immediate. Akhenaten could feel it, the river's life force spreading beyond the temple, reaching out across the land. The crops would grow again, the herds would return, and the people would once more gather at the banks of the Nile, their faith in the gods restored. The light faded, and the chalice returned to its resting place within the pillar. The chamber was silent once more, but the weight of the moment lingered in the air. Nefertari stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with pride. "You have done it, my pharaoh. Egypt is saved." Akhenaten lowered his head, a sense of peace settling over him. "We have restored balance," he said, "not through power, but through understanding. The Nile belongs to all, as it always has." As they made their way back through the temple, the weight of their victory was clear in every step. The Nile had been freed, its treasures restored, and Egypt would once again flourish beneath the light of the gods. But Akhenaten knew that the true treasure was not the chalice itself, but the balance they had fought to reclaim, the harmony that would sustain Egypt for generations to come. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden light across the land, Akhenaten smiled, knowing that Egypt would endure. The Nile, its heart restored, would flow